Ni No Kuni 2 Revenant Kingdom is a hybrid JRPG and city management simulator created by Level 5 and released on March 23rd of 2018 worldwide by Level 5 and Bandai Namco. In many ways, this is one of the most original JRPGs put out in years, and to find anything similar you'll need to go all the way back to 1990 with the first ActRaiser. Where most JRPGs employ only two modes of gameplay, the exploration and the battle, this game employs several, and to go over them all and the various pros and cons of each will take a while, so we're not gonna beat around the bush with this one. So strap in, ladies and gentlemen, cause I got a lot to say. First things first, let's start with the story and characters. Much like Ni No Kuni 1, we start in the real world. Here we meet one of our two lead characters, Roland. Roland is the President of the United States of America. After a sudden attack, as he appears on the verge of death, he is transported to a new world. Upon arriving here, we meet our second main character, Evan. Following the passing of his Grimalkin father, who seems to be into interspecies relationships, Evan was thrust into his position as a king at a very young age. Seeing his age as an easy weakness to exploit, a faction of militant rat people stage a coup and overthrow him. Roland helps Evan escape with his life, but the land he once reigned over is forfeit. Following this, Evan sets out to create his own kingdom and form a pact with all the other kingdoms in the land, including his recently overtaken land of Ding Dong Dell. This pact is called the Declaration of Interdependence and is symbolic of creating a type of world peace. From this point onward, the narrative plays out like a collection of short stories as you go from one kingdom to the next, solving their problems and bringing them into the pact. These short stories play heavily on social statements about race relations, classism, gentrification, overcoming disability, and corruption among political leaders. While each story is interesting in its own right and adds new characters to your party, the arcs bear little relevance to the overarching plot of civil unrest in Ding Dong Dell or the development of the mysterious antagonist who keeps showing up in each kingdom. As a storyline, it has a very leisurely pace and feel. This isn't some grand adventure of hunting down a bad guy or overcoming great feats of strength. Instead, it's merely about meeting new people and building a kingdom. While it's a serviceable catalyst to launch an adventure and validate the use of its various gameplay mechanics, it's reliant on its characters to keep it interesting. And this is where we call my credibility and legitimacy into question. Ni No Kuni 2 does have problems, and I can't very well ignore them. As I was stating, the story is very reliant on its characters to keep it interesting, and the characters sadly see very little in terms of depth or development.
What?
For example, here we have an early cutscene of Batu speaking about his daughter to Evan. This scene is meant to highlight Batu's love for his family despite his outward appearance. Sadly, this scene, like many others, is reduced to just a couple overly generic lines of dialogue and dismissed forever afterwards. If you blink, you can miss it. Case in point, it's so short that I have to loop the footage so that it runs the duration of me explaining the issue with it. While they clearly tell you the impression they want you to have, the impressions never come off as genuine or memorable, nor are they consistently represented as the game carries on. Ergo, the impressions they want you to have fail to leave real impressions. A bit of the old show don't tell could work wonders here for what they aim to accomplish. With very little exception, this rapid fire, reduced to the lowest common denominator form of writing is prevalent from beginning to end. You'll notice quickly how the game rarely lingers long enough to properly unfold its themes or events.
I definitely have breast cancer.
And the result of this is a 15-hour main campaign, with plot and character development on par with a Michael Bay film. By the end of the game, they try to make up for the lack of story by introducing a whole bunch of plot points at once before and directly after the final boss. And honestly, they come off as so unprovoked and unwarranted that it was hard for me not to laugh at them. I can't spoil the end of the game for obvious reasons, but to give you an example of what it's like, I've prepared this short story. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Tark. Tark lived on Earth. One day, everybody on Earth died. Then Tark remembered his grandfather was a Time Lord, so Tark used his latent Time Lord abilities to save the planet. Also, Tark had level 4 fire spells and drove a really cool car. The end. The 15-hour runtime for many will be a point of contention, but for a good deal of people, it will be a blessing in disguise. It's not the runtime I had issue with, it's merely how they chose to develop things in the runtime they had. Oftentimes, the story writes itself into positions where plot progression cannot occur without absurd or downright stupid happenstance. At this one portion of the game, the party was engaged in an investigation that had come to a standstill. Because they were just standing in the line of sight, yet out of earshot of this vendor, the vendor called to them and asked them to do a delivery for her. They were, after all, just standing around, so it's not like they couldn't be useful. Of course, the delivery leads them to somebody who can progress the story, but it's hard to feel like it happened for any other reason than the plot needing a way to continue. This happens more than once in the game, and it just strikes me as lazy. The setup of the story validates the gameplay mechanics, and the characters serve as a good vehicle to get across the social statements of the game, but a collection of loosely connected social statements isn't really a holistically well-rounded or interesting story to me. Thankfully, the individual story arcs are fun and interesting on their own, even if they don't play much into the overarching narrative, and save for one drawn-out quest to get to the library in Goldpaw, none of it feels like it doesn't belong or is forced padding. I just wish the overarching narrative and characters had more focus beyond serving to validate different parts of the game so they could develop and be impactful on their own. Also, Lofty looks like bad fan art of Lisa Simpson. Now that you'll never be able to unsee Lofty that way, let's move on to the various modes of gameplay that Ni No Kuni employs, starting with the battle mechanics. Enemies spawn on the overworld and in dungeons. Before you engage in combat with them, you can gauge the risk factor by the information over their head. This information includes their level, their name, and it's color-coded by how difficult they should be based on your level. Gray means their level is comparable to your own. Orange and red are hard and hardest respectively. Enemies with their info in blue are of a low enough level that they will actively avoid combat with you and are more or less not worth engaging. When you begin battle, the most useful thing to pay attention to besides your health is this weapon chart up here. The percentages represent the efficacy of your attacks. If the enemy springs a surprise attack on you, these all start at 0%. Charging them is done merely through attacking. Square is your light attack, triangle is your heavy attack. L1 to block and L1 while moving to dodge. Circle to jump, L2 to cycle through your 3 melee weapons. R2 will bring up a chart allowing you to use your magic and special abilities. Using one of these will cost MP from the meter just above your HP, and also drop your weapon efficacy back to 0. So it's a good idea to have fully charged weapons to switch to after using a special ability. R1 uses your ranged weapon in exchange for MP as well, and if you hold R1 you can get larger attacks. While in battle, small creatures called higgledies populate the playfield. You can bring 4 groups of these into battle with you at a time. Occasionally, they will congregate and position themselves to use their special abilities. When they do this, you can trigger their abilities with X at no cost. Overall, I think this battle system is fantastic and quite a lot of fun, but even when taking on enemies with red-coded names, the ones that should be hard, Ni No Kuni 2 is Ni No Kuni too damn easy. There are special reskins of normal enemies called tainted enemies that pose a greater threat, but even with them, the ones that actually offer a challenge are few and far between. Sadly, the game does not have difficulty options, but it does allow you to change many stats influencing your effectiveness against certain enemy types. The problem with this is that everything works in tandem with something else. If you make something harder for yourself, it sympathetically makes something else easier, which is far from a solution to the difficulty problem. While challenges can be found, it's sad to say that none of them are tied to the narrative of the story, and so it never feels like the feats you overcome are tied to anything of real importance. If you want to maintain some semblance of overcoming story-related obstacles, you'll need to avoid using the high-level gear you work to get and steer clear of a great deal of the side content so that you don't become over-leveled. While I had fun with this battle system, there is still room for improvement. Timed blocks could easily be used to stagger enemies. Timed dodge can grant special effects or special attacks, and party attacks seem to have no implementation at all. There's far more they could have done, but for what it is fun, if not a bit shallow and easy. Next, let's move on to the Dreamer's Maze. Without spoilers, there are 9 of these in the game, and they are far and wide my favorite piece of additional content. Essentially, these are randomly generated dungeons. The longer you stay in them, the more this meter charges up here. When the meter reaches 100%, the dungeon levels up, scaling the enemies 5 levels higher, including the bosses found at the end of each Dreamer's Maze. This meter can charge 5 times, so the Dreamer's Maze can get very difficult if you allow it. As you journey through the floors of the Dreamer's Maze, killing enemies, destroying objects, and talking to NPCs will get you pink orbs. Bring these orbs to these statues and they will lower the level of the dungeon. Each statue can only be interacted with once, and each time you use a statue, the next one will cost more. Pink orbs aren't just used at these statues though. Specific to the Dreamer's Maze are chests that open at the cost of orbs, and these chests often contain great loot. The Dreamer's Maze, however, also is not without its problems. Unfortunately, the script to randomly generate the dungeon isn't quite as stringent as it needs to be. This can result in a chest that needs 25 orbs to open, spawning on the first floor, and the first floor might only give you 6 orbs. Once you go down a level in the Dreamer's Maze, you cannot go back up, so these chests become absolutely impossible to open. Furthermore, there's very little room types in the generator to create the mazes out of, and they all end up feeling rather samey. On that note, it's also worth pointing out how much of this game is copied and pasted. On the overworld, there are a ton of forests and caves to explore, but you'll notice very quickly they're all nearly identical. While sometimes the palettes are swapped, the room shapes are always the same, with slight changes to the dungeon layouts. Problems though the Dreamer Maze may have, it was definitely a fun mix-up to the gameplay, and a fun race against the clock to make it to the boss before the dungeon scales too high. Like everything, it isn't difficult to win, but you can make it that way if you want, and the added incentive of time-based difficulty scaling was a nice touch. Third format of gameplay we're going to talk about are the skirmishes. Straight from my favorite part of the game to my least. Since Evan has his own kingdom, he has his own army, and this means battles with lots of soldiers. These battles take place directly on the overworld. Evan can lead up to 4 teams of soldiers into battle. These soldiers form a circle around Evan in factions. Using the weapon triangle system from Fire Emblem, you must rotate your soldiers around you to pair them against enemies they are strong against, or your numbers will quickly thin. Using your military might points, you can call in reinforcements, rebuild destroyed enemy structures, or cast special attacks. But you'll want to be conservative with this, as the number is finite and easy to burn through. Once all of your soldiers are dead and your might hits 0, you are forced to retreat and try again. On the plus side, if your soldiers leveled up over the course of the attack, losing the battle does not revert their progress, so you can always try again. Using a special currency called King's Guilders, you can also purchase additional aid prior to the start of the battle if you believe it to be a necessity. Without a doubt, this is a solidly developed piece of the gameplay. I don't have much criticism for how they've done anything wrong or how it could be improved. It personally just wasn't very fun for me. But hey, that might not be the case for you. So let's move on to the final and arguably most time-consuming part of the gameplay, the kingdom management. If you played games like SimCity or even something like StarCraft or Age of Empires, this is going to feel very natural to you. Basically, Evan begins his kingdom with a castle. As you get more villagers, something you acquire mostly through side quests, you will have to build them places to work. The more people you have working, the more King's Guilders they can amass for you. King's Guilders are basically tax dollars and can only be used in skirmishes and kingdom management. You can put nearly any villager in any building so long as there's space for them there. But to use them well, you'll want to put them in a line of work that makes the most use of their stats and special abilities. In this instance, I would say special abilities are of more importance. Most buildings allow you to research topics if you have the money, skills, and stats to do so. The things researched can greatly expand your gameplay capabilities. Research can take a long time to complete, but the more people involved in the research and the more money you throw at it, the faster it will finish. Some buildings allow you to research spells that open up entirely new areas of gameplay on the overworld, or even allow you to talk to the dead. Some expand the capabilities of your higgledies or your troops' effectiveness in skirmish battles. Some buildings simply gather materials for crafting, others allow you to build weapons and armors, while others still may have no effect on gameplay whatsoever, and just allow you to listen to in-game music. When citizens have been employed long enough, they can be leveled up to boost their effectiveness in research, and similarly, as your kingdom grows, you can level up each building within it to boost its resource output or avenues of research. There's a building to affect nearly every area of gameplay in this town, and I think that's just awesome. In some form or another, I can see how some people might call this bloatware. For me, it's fun bloatware and offers a lot to change up the gameplay. If only there was a building to raise the difficulty of the battles. And those are the various forms of gameplay in Ni No Kuni's 2 Irrelevant Pringles. If variety is something you crave, this game definitely has you covered, especially for a JRPG. Although you might not like every aspect of the variety it offers. Honestly, although I would never personally play it, I think a spin-off title on mobile phones or 3DS that uses just the kingdom building and turns the skirmish battles into PvP against other kingdoms would be an absolute hit. But from here, of course, we can't end a review without talking about some technical aspects of the game. I played this game on a base model PS4, and I gotta say visually, it's mostly pretty good. They targeted 1080p at 60 FPS, and for the most part they hit it. Some textures left in plain sight really do not take advantage of the resolution, but these are few and far between. The frame rate, while consistently high, is very inconsistent in places. This is especially true in certain areas of the overworld, where it drops by about 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. It's very infrequent FPS drops happen in battle, but they do indeed happen. From what I understand, the FPS drops do not occur on the PS4 Pro, so if you have the Pro, expect a straight 60. The art style and design is absolutely spectacular. Every area of the game is packed with charm and designed around basic principles. Take Ding Dong Dell for instance. In the land run by cats, everything is designed with paw prints, cat ears, and fish patterns. It's frankly just pleasing to look at. The game controls nice and I never felt like my inputs were dropping. Partner AI is still not fantastic. Although this time around, they're so overpowered it hardly matters that they run into bosses who are clearly casting massive AoE attacks around them. The game is voiced in English and they do a great job, but there is very little voiceover work to speak of. Something I noticed happening a lot in games lately that just kind of annoys me happens in this game as well. When a line is not voiced over, the characters will often say a 1 or 2 word phrase that's not in the written dialogue, and it just throws me off.
No, dear.
Having somebody talking to you while you're trying to read is never not annoying to me. Shooting off of this, there are times in skirmish battles where characters will have short conversations, but the text on screen is so small it's hard to read, and it goes away entirely too fast.
Hey there.
What the? Forward march!
The sound effects in the game are all great, and the music is really fun as well. If you liked the music in Ni No Kuni 1, you'll definitely like what this game has to offer as well. Sadly, some scenes, just like the first, are devoid of both music and voiceovers, and as a result can be quite drab or boring to sit through. In conclusion, how did it turn out? Where do I settle on this game that clearly has a lot going for it, but clearly could be improved in a lot of other areas? Well, its problems come down to one thing for me. In a recent interview, Level 5 stated, Ni No Kuni 2 was developed for Western markets, and they were hesitant about even releasing it in Japan. What this means became abundantly clear to me over the course of my 36 hours with the game. For general fans of JRPGs like myself, you may end up missing some of the things that draw you to the genre the most. Bearing that in mind, that doesn't mean the game entirely lacks appeal. Despite all of its shortcomings, I did enjoy most of what was on offer here. I don't like that developing a game for the Western audience means making it incredibly simple, comparatively short and shallow, and turning your characters into vehicles for social statements rather than having them be integral parts of a developing story. But for the most part, it seems this game did in fact resonate with Western audiences. Had it been much longer than it was, the vacuous nature of the characters and plot progression may have rubbed me the wrong way much harder than it did, but its length this time around worked to its benefit. The gameplay itself was mostly fun, and there was always something to explore in its multitude of gameplay formats. But what I consider the most important parts of a JRPG, the plot and character progression, seems to be regarded as the least important part in this game. Where I like JRPGs to succeed the most, Ni No Kuni 2 fails the hardest. At the end of it all, Ni No Kuni 2, to me, was just alright. And there goes my sub count. At the very least, I would recommend this to people who are just trying to get into JRPGs for the first time. But if you're already a big JRPG fan, you have a lot more to consider than they do. But I don't want you guys to just adopt my position on this. I want you guys to look at what I showcased and calculate if the criticisms I levied really mean that much to you. This game is truly a unique experience, and your decision to play it or not should not be based on the opinions of just one man. After all, the 85 on Metacritic clearly insinuates I am in the minority position here, so it's undoubtedly worth it to look into other perspectives. And before you guys bomb me with downvotes, just remember that having the wrong opinion is not the end of the world. Well, shit. Well, if you guys found this video useful or helpful and you want to see more, like, comment, subscribe, you guys all know the deal already. Share this video if you can. Links to socials are in the description. As always, folks, thanks for watching.